These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Maar. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
He created a brand new way of depicting the world. The colours would fizz and pop on the surface.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? Success in the modern world of art is not found in the small details. It's measured by scale of ambition, by price at auction, and your media profile. In short, size matters. This is Tate Modern, the triumphant monster among contemporary art galleries. And with nearly 6 million visitors a year, it's in the top 10 most visited galleries and museums all around the world. So, in a colossal space like this, it's entirely right that we find a hugely important painting by a giant of modern art whose fame is on an equally vast scale. When asked to name the world's most famous painter, more than 90% of us choose him. His paintings are so utterly distinctive that when you see this one whole, there is no question about who painted it. This could only be by one person, Pablo Picasso. It's his Weeping Woman, painted in 1937, and nothing quite like it had ever been made before. Once seen, however briskly, never forgotten. This is one of the most unforgettable of the many remarkable images that Picasso made during an immense career that dominates the art world of the 20th century. For a picture so strong it almost jabs you in the eyes, it's really quite small, and the subject could hardly be simpler. A woman wearing a red hat is crying. She's holding a handkerchief, and she is so grief-stricken, she's more or less chewing it. It's deceptively simple, even cartoon-like. Her face has been shaped using thick black lines and painted using a striking combination of bright acid colors and much darker reds and blues. This is a woman in torment, racked with wrenching anguish. If you look at Picasso's treatment of her face, the tears are like little raindrops or jewels, and her face is marked in grief, almost as if she's been clawed by a tiger, those deep, deep gouges and scratches in blue on the face. You very rarely see visible teeth in portraits, and the teeth are there, again, emphasizing the ugliness almost of grief. Now, this is a very powerful image, but as a Picasso painting, it's not exactly unusual. He was a very prolific artist. It's said that every single day of his working life, Picasso made at least 3 things. And of those things, 10,000 or more were paintings. So what makes this, amongst those 10,000, quite so special? Well, this is an image painted at an important hinge in the artist's life, when a horrific event in Spanish history arrived at a tumultuous moment in Picasso's complicated love life. To really understand this picture properly, we need to go back more than 100 years to the story of the young Picasso, an arrogant, cocky young man determined to take the entire art world by storm. For an arrogant, cocky young man who wanted to make his name, there was only one destination. Even from the earliest years of his life in Spain, where he was born in 1881, the place that drew this prodigious talent like a magnet was Paris.
Anyone that wanted to be a serious artist had to learn about art seriously, and that was happening in Paris. And all the galleries as well, the Louvre, Musée d'Orsay, beautiful Arc de Triomphe. People flocked to Paris.
And for a young man like Picasso, there were, let's say, other attractions when he finally arrived in 1900, aged all of 19.
There were the bars, the brothels. It was fun, it was inspiring, and it was the place to be.
There was this kind of bohemian mix which was going on in Paris.
It attracts artists, they meet and socialize. But most importantly, they are debating the future of art. They are innovating together, they are taking risks.
I think Picasso was there just exactly at the right time.
The main influences during the early part of his time in Paris were stars of the previous generation, like Renoir and Toulouse-Lautrec. Like them, Picasso painted the world he saw around him in Montmartre, the beggars, bohemians, musicians and dance halls. But to get noticed, he had to show them in radically new ways.
This is where Picasso learns to be an artist. It's a place where he can really flower, where he can really develop, and of course experiment. And the outcome of these experiments are some of the most important and significant developments in modern art in the 20th century.
One of the greatest of his breakthrough works was the almost ugly and still shocking The Ladies of Avignon, or Demoiselles d'Avignon.
The Demoiselles d'Avignon was probably the most important painting of the first half of the 20th century. Picasso paints it in 1907. It's a brothel scene.
It's drawn from his own memories of visiting a brothel in Barcelona when he was a young man living there.
Picasso drew on his latest enthusiasm, African tribal art, and wrenched apart the rules of painting that had dominated Western art for centuries. But even that isn't what really unsettles the viewer. It's the blatant, unashamed animal directness of the brothel girls in their pain. Picasso has turned his back on the beauty and tenderness traditionally associated with nudes.
And you're looking at them sometimes from very multiple angles. So you can see a woman's buttocks and then they're twisted round and you can see her inner thigh. And you get this kind of very intimate but quite brutalized view both of woman but also of humanity.
We're looking at 5 women who do not sit there or stand there passively averting their gaze from the male viewer, but rather they return the gaze with this power, with this extraordinary confidence and sexuality. And this is what made the painting so disarming.
Most who stood in front of it weren't sure where to look. Picasso's great rival Matisse first thought it was a bad joke.
Matisse actually hated Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. He said that Picasso would be found hanged behind the work because it was so bad.
It shocked some of his other friends. And it wasn't shown for a long time because it was regarded as so revolutionary, so kind of brutal, so powerful.
The small coterie of Picasso's friends and admirers seized on this innovation, this moment, and understood and appreciated that art could never be the same again.
Everybody knows that something dramatic has changed and you have to paint your way through it or you have to reject it, but you have to face up to it.
Nowadays, many people argue that that picture was the real beginning of modern painting. But there's an enormous gap between Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and the raw emotional power of Weeping Woman. And to pursue Picasso on that journey, we have to delve deeper into his tangled emotional life and also visit one of the darkest and grimmest episodes in modern Spanish history. Picasso's Weeping Woman nods to everything he's best known for: unique methods, jolting colors, and of course the radical artistic style he personally invented. To understand the genius of this canvas, first you need to understand Cubism. The great discovery or invention of Cubism, which Picasso and Georges Braque invented together just before the First World War, is that artists can see the world entirely differently. Instead of viewing it as a single flat plane in front of them from one perspective, you can bring different perspectives into the same picture. In this 1918 still life by Picasso, he paints a table on which are strewn a guitar, playing cards, a bottle, pieces of table, half-hidden shadows. They're fragmented and jumbled up across the canvas like a broken jigsaw. Breaking reality down in order to build it up again is central to the idea of Cubism. You can, as it were, look around objects and behind them and emphasize their basic shapes. So you've got cylinders and globes and curves and lots of shadows. And by doing that, you see the world differently. Something as boring and banal as a bottle on a table or possibly a guitar suddenly looks interesting again for the very first time. Picasso revolutionized the way people looked at a canvas. It was a skill he would bring to all his most important works, and one which made him fabulously wealthy. By the 1920s, Picasso was an A-list celebrity. He was living his personal dream in a thrilling city, throbbing with excitement and opportunity.
He just became richer and richer. He could do no wrong. The more he painted, the more ideas he had, and he had a lot of ideas, the more his work sold. He became extremely wealthy very quickly.
Picasso was at the peak of his powers, his confidence and productivity overflowing. But while he was driven by everything going on in his creative world, there was one place he looked for inspiration more than most.
Picasso loved women. He loved them around. They made him feel good. As a man who was 5'4" and not particularly handsome, women flocked at his feet. Why? Because the time that they were with him, he made them feel special.
He has many love affairs. He's very charismatic. He's identified early on as a great, enormous talent. He's very seductive, and he has many relationships with women who become his muses. The inspiration, a source of kind of rejuvenation to him.
He referred to women as either goddesses or doormats and weeping machines. And it's extraordinary how they stayed with him, and they fought over one another for his love. And he depicted them time and time again.
Every important work in Picasso's collection, including The Weeping Woman, was inspired by one of his ever-changing cast of lovers. But there were some who meant much more than others. One with whom he had a very long relationship and a daughter was Marie-Thérèse Walter. Her and Picasso's grandson is Olivier.
My grandfather, Pablo Picasso, met my grandmother, my future grandmother, Marie-Thérèse, in 1927, in January, in front of the Galeries Lafayette. She was in the shop. He was looking at her through the window, and he waited outside. And when she came out, he said, "Hello, mademoiselle. I am Picasso, and I would like to make a portrait of you." So she was surprised because she had no clue who Picasso was. But she said that he was a charming man with a beautiful red tie. And this is how the story started. Marie-Thérèse was 17 years old. She was a perfect model for Pablo. She was innocent, and he was like a teacher. And step by step, she became totally addicted to this beautiful little love life.
Marie-Thérèse was the latest in what was a rather long line of women whose character and looks inspired the by now world-famous Picasso to paint and draw furiously. But being his muse wasn't a poetic fate.
Being Picasso's muse was not all it was cracked up to be. You might think, oh, it'd be great, you're living the high life and you're in one of his beautiful villas and being taken out to bars and clubs. But it was a short-lived occupation. You had to be on call, hand and foot, 24/7. There may have been two of you on the go at the same time, and you may not have known about the other one. And it was hard work. You would have to pose for him, You would have to satisfy him. You would have to make sure that he was happy, that he was watered and fed. It was almost like looking after a child.
Away from his studio on the Rue des Grands Augustins, and after nearly 10 contented and prolific years with Marie-Thérèse, Picasso finally began to find that his creative motor was running on empty.
He'd had 2 very, very difficult years where he'd almost decided to give up painting altogether and become a poet. And, in fact, he joked that on his tombstone he would like to have Pablo Picasso, poet, one-time painter.
But there was new inspiration on the horizon. In 1936, Picasso was at the Café Les Deux Magots, a chic and happening hotspot for Parisian intellectuals and artists, when he was introduced to a woman called Dora Maar, who would eventually be the model for Weeping Woman.
He saw this sophisticated lady seated here. She was playing with a very pointed knife, and she was jabbing with the knife between her spreaded fingers, and sometimes she was missing the target. So there was a lot of blood on her hand, and Pablo was fascinated. She was a photographer, she was an artist, she was a painter, and was far from the situation with Marie-Thérèse, the sweet Marie-Thérèse. The relationship became immediately like intense.
His newest lover, a political artist herself, opened Picasso up to the dark truths about the age they were living through. He began to think afresh and to work afresh.
And he needs something different. And certainly in the 1930s, when he encounters Dora Maar, he really needed somebody who was dark, deep, a woman who was highly intelligent, creative.
Dora Maar was really as much of an artist as Picasso was, but because she was a woman and it wasn't the #MeToo time, she didn't have her chance.
In these 2 portraits, we can see just how starkly their different characters impacted on his painting. In 1932's The Dreamer, Marie-Thérèse is presented lying back in a post-coital reverie. Curving, overtly sexual forms are rendered in colourful, lush, thick, soft pastel colours. She's a dance of sensual wobble. By contrast, Dora looks back at us in a more challenging way. She blazes with personality. At her ear, drinking from her mind, is a bee, which some suggest may be Picasso himself. This same bee would reappear in Weeping Woman, feeding on a tear. Red fingernails, like that bloodied knife, match the challenging pout of her mouth, and she's all acidic colours and angularity, not cuddly, but incisive. So it's unsurprising that it's Dora who would now change the way that Picasso thought and painted.
Picasso thought that she was extraordinary. She was gutsy, she was fiery, she was not afraid, and he found that very attractive.
It was at the height of his affair with the more mature and challenging Dora, early in 1937, that Picasso was asked to paint something for the Paris International Exhibition, a huge art show opening that summer.
He accepts the commission, and it's going to have to be pretty fast because it has to be finished by June. And the evolution of the painting is quite strange because Picasso has absolutely no idea for the first 2 or 3 months what he's going to do.
Picasso struggles. He got this kind of block.
It was Dora who got him out of his creative hole. In April 1937, she pushed a report about a wartime atrocity under his nose.
It was Dora Maar who brought Pablo's newspaper showing that a village in Spain has been attacked by German planes, dropping bombs everywhere. I've seen the article in the newspaper, so the description was horrible.
First pictures from the Basque Republic of the holy city of Guernica, scene of the most terrible air raid our modern history yet can boast. Hundreds were killed here, men, women, and children. 4,000 bombs were dropped out of a blue sky into a hell that raged unchecked for 5 murderous hours.
Picasso's homeland was being torn apart by a bitter civil war, pitching nationalists against Republicans. The nationalists were helped by the Nazi and Italian fascist forces who had decimated Guernica, largely, it seems, out of mere curiosity to see what a large-scale air raid could do. The attack had no strategic purpose.
They come in, saturation, bombing, sucking the oxygen out, and totally destroying the city.
70% of the city was destroyed, and a third of the population was wiped out.
The first time that there has been bombing of that scale in Europe. It's the catastrophe which alerts us to what modern warfare was going to look like.
Reading about Guernica, Picasso was incensed, and he knew he'd found the subject for his Paris exhibition mural.
He said and believed that art is the lie that told the truth, and he wanted the world to know. And Picasso was such a big, majestic superstar now in the art world that he felt that the only way to communicate the truth was through art, because art communicates better than any language, and it breaks down language barriers.
The work he painted furiously in just a few weeks, the precursor to his Weeping Woman, is called simply Guernica. It now hangs in Madrid's Reina Sofia, where more than 4 million people come to see it every single year. Manuel Borja Virel is the museum's director.
He had many photographs of bombings in Spain. We know that he was looking at the newsreels. We know he was looking at the newspaper. And he's trying to understand this period and using media of the period, but through the tools of a painter. So that's why the painting is black and white, which is the color of the newsreels.
This lack of colour gives added impact to a canvas full of writhing, screaming, dying people and animals, rendered in flattened, cubist caricature.
He reacts with this painting to all these horrors. He reacts also to a new type of violence, the fact that the murder of a complete population could be done in a kind of administrative way.
In 1937, Picasso's mother wrote to him from Barcelona. She described how smoke from the burning city was making her eyes water. And it was this image of a crying woman in a devastated city that then began to play on his mind. In this painting, that distraught woman is a hugely powerful figure. The real-life model for this and the Weeping Woman was Dora. As Picasso worked, Dora was constantly at his side, photographing his progress. She even added the flex on the horse's flank herself.
We see that the tongue, that the scream of the woman could be like an arrow against the bombs, an arrow against the monstrosity, and also the breast. In many cases, they are like bombs, and the top of the breast is like the fuse of the bomb. So what he's telling us is that there is an element of resistance and an element that will be able, through poetry, through the communality of the suffering, overcome the barbarity of the monstrosity of the war.
The bombing of Guernica and his relationship with Dora, a woman in so many ways his equal, changed everything for Picasso. Up to this point, his paintings had centered around Planet Pablo. Now he was making a political statement. It packed a punch, but it did not land him much instant acclaim.
When the painting was first presented in 1937, I mean, of course, there was a group of people that thought it was great, but many people didn't like it. For some avant-garde artists, this was too much of a billboard. This was too much of a propaganda element. On the other hand, many people thought it was too abstract. So in a way, Guernica was caught between the people that thought it was too obvious and the people that thought it was too abstract.
In time, this canvas would find a significant place in the world, but for now, Picasso was restless. Although his great anti-war masterpiece was now finished, Picasso was transfixed by the sufferings of the Spanish, and in particular, that idea of the tears running down the face of his own mother. That became in his head the simplest of images, a weeping, desolate woman. And this was the figure he now needed to immortalize. Pablo Picasso's Weeping Woman is a powerful image of the Spanish Civil War. Having completed and then exhibited his large-scale anti-war canvas, Guernica, he spent weeks obsessively painting and sketching the same tearful woman over and over again, a woman inspired by his mother and modelled on his lover, Dora Maar. This one, his final and widely considered his best, was completed in just a few days. When you get up close and personal with this picture, one of the things you notice very quickly is the thickness of the paint. Now, this is interesting because a lot of the time at this period, Picasso paints quite thinly. He puts great washes of colour, and the paint is really there to serve the drawing, not the other way around. This is different. At times, he's put on so much paint, it's almost on the edge of falling off the canvas. That is interesting because it just shows how hard he was working on this picture. This is a picture he sweated over and worked again and reworked and reworked and reworked until for him it was absolutely perfect. And the sweaty intensity of that physical effort really amplifies his hugely bold choice of colours. What he's done is he's used all the warm, generous colours, the reds and the golds and the yellows and the oranges, but he's pushed them to the back of the picture plane. They're the wall behind the girl, they're the red carpet on which she's standing. Her own face is painted almost entirely in cold, cold colours, lots of white, lots of icy blue, lots of cold, acidic greens. So he's making the desolation vivid through the colours and the choice of colours. It has the raw urgency, not of an academic painting, but of a piece of graffiti in the New York Underground. Brilliant graffiti, I grant you. Picasso is using cubist distortion, not to show off a new way of seeing or painting, but to show that he, as a modern painter, can represent human desolation and sorrow as emotionally and effectively as any of the great masters of the High Renaissance. This powerful image had a profound effect on an old and close friend of Picasso's. An artist and voracious collector of modern art, Roland Penrose, was visiting Pablo Picasso when he saw it in his studio. He was blown away by the painting's savagery and its power, and even though the paint was barely dry, he asked if he could buy it.
Roland Penrose wanted it. He was desperate to have that painting. And I think it's a recognition, really, of the closeness of their friendship that he allowed Roland to buy it from him.
Picasso sold it to him for £284, £19,000 in today's money. In the back of Penrose's mind were the germs of an idea. He could send it out on a tour with Picasso's first anti-war masterpiece.
He organised both Guernica and Weeping Woman to go around and be shown as a way of highlighting the plight of the people of the Spanish Civil War.
It was really an attempt to alert and raise money by touring this extraordinary work. First of all, it starts in London in the Burlington Galleries, just off Bond Street. And it's not a huge success, but it is supported by people like Virginia Woolf and E.M. Forster, and who give subscriptions to showing it. And it visits other towns. I think it goes to Sheffield. And then it comes back to London, to the Whitechapel.
And 15,000 people come to see the painting. It is opened by Clement Attlee, the leader of the opposition, leader of the Labour Party and subsequent Prime Minister. And it's a great rallying call for the working class in the East End to support the Republican cause in Spain. And apparently the ticket price was a pair of boots to donate to soldiers and workers in Spain who are facing this fascist onslaught.
Picasso's first political works had finally made their mark, 580 miles from the atrocity they portrayed. When the now triumphant tour was over, Penrose took Weeping Woman back to the home he shared with his wife, the photographer Lee Miller, and their son Anthony. He still has very strong memories of the man who painted it, his father's great friend, the now middle-aged Picasso.
When Picasso came here in 1950, he immediately liked it. He felt very at home. He liked the animals on the farm. And he liked things like plum pudding and stuff like that my mother gave him to eat, and Scotch whiskey. He was very keen on that.
At the time, Anthony was just a child.
Well, I was instantly drawn to Picasso because he had this incredible warmth and friendliness and this capacity to really engage with me as a child. We invented a game. I was the bull, and it was my job to put my horns on and charge across the room and try and knock Picasso over. But he was so quick on his feet that he'd jump out of the way at the last minute, and I would go splat into the wall, and I got fed up with going splat into the wall, so I thought of a different strategy. And I watched and waited, and when he wasn't looking, I crept up and I bit him. And he bit me right back. And in the moment before I started to yell, my mum heard him say, "Huh, that's the first Englishman I've ever bitten."
Picasso's Weeping Woman also left its mark on the young Anthony.
I guess I must have been about 8 years old, and I asked my mum, "Why is the lady crying?" And she said, "The lady used to live in a town called Guernica. And one day, without any warning at all, airplanes came over and started dropping bombs, and they killed lots of people, and they set fire to the whole place, and they might have even killed her little boy." It gave me an enduring fascination with what was behind that painting. If you look at the woman's eyes, you can see what appear to be the silhouettes of airplanes. Now, she'd probably never, ever seen an airplane in her life before, and suddenly they were there droning through the sky and dropping bombs and killing everybody. That image would have been seared into her retina, if you like, forever. We can see that she is absolutely distraught.
That anger, that pain is what makes Weeping Woman so unforgettable. Now, there are people who think that great art should be like a warm bath, calm and reassuring, a kind of ointment for the pains of daily life. But it seems to me that if art is great, it ought to be able to represent all of human life, and that means the pain and the anger and the sorrow as well. An ointment? A warm bath? This is more like a barbed wire face mask. The Weeping Woman was an extraordinary painting to have on the walls of Penrose's London flat, and it had been part of their lives for more than 30 years when the next page turned in the remarkable story of this painting. Roland and his wife Lee were at home in their Sussex farmhouse in April 1969 when they got a phone call.
It was my father's housekeeper from the apartment in London, and she was distraught. She was sobbing into the phone. The place had been broken into, the whole place had been trashed. The thieves had stolen absolutely the cream of the crop. There were several Picassos. There were, of course, some really important works, but the star of them all was the Weeping Woman. She had gone. My parents were absolutely devastated. They didn't have those paintings in their lives because of the monetary value. They had them there because of their importance as works of art, and to have them taken away, it was like a bereavement. It was a really shattering loss.
Picasso's great and troubling portrait had vanished, if not into thin air, then certainly into the grey London smog. By coincidence, the Metropolitan Police had just established a specialist art theft squad who are now on the case, and a reward worth nearly £500,000 in today's money was offered.
The investigation into the theft went on for quite a long time and not much happened. But then the police found an informer who pretended to be a go-between between Roland and the thieves. And the police were tailing him when the thieves took him to where the paintings were hidden. It was in a shop in South London. Unknown to anybody, that day, a demolition team had moved in to tear down the shop and give it a makeover. So the thieves saw what was going on and they just went straight on past, and the police were following them, went straight on past, and the whole thing came to nothing.
It seemed as if this great painting about loss might itself be lost forever. Picasso's Weeping Woman is one of the artist's earliest and most powerful pieces of political propaganda. An image of a distraught woman which speaks to us as powerfully today as the year she was painted in response to a wartime atrocity. But in 1969, after more than 30 years as part of a private collection, hanging unseen in a London flat and frankly forgotten by the wider world, this extraordinary painting was stolen right off the wall. The Penrose family were terrified that Weeping Woman had disappeared forever. A major police sting operation had failed dismally, and unknown to all but the thieves, the paintings were hidden in a shop which was about to be gutted.
Two of the workmen were tasked with clearing out all the junk, and they went into the basement and they pulled out the works, and one of them said, "Oh, it's all rubbish, burn it." And the other one, he thought, might be a bob's worth in this. And so he took the Weeping Woman to an artist's materials shop. They saw that it was hand-painted in oils and it was signed Picasso, so they thought it might be important. And they called the police. And of course, all hell broke loose in that moment.
Stolen from under their noses and coming perilously close to being dumped in a bin, Weeping Woman was finally back, safe and sound.
My father went to Chelsea police station, where they were all stacked up in a cell for safekeeping. And he said, for the first time in his life, he wept for joy to see them all back and safe.
The responsibility of owning such a painting could not have been made any clearer. And in 1987, Anthony's father gave Weeping Woman to the Tate. And she's been there ever since.
She's meant to be out there, telling people about the atrocity of war.
For the first time in half a century, Picasso's masterpiece was on public display. People flocked to see it and experience for themselves just how remarkable she is.
It's very bold, it's very powerful, and of course, intensely sad. And I think you get almost the feeling of the emotion of her.
The painting, I think, is universally moving, and that's Picasso's brilliance, that's his achievement. He's able to take the particularity of that story, of these poor civilians bombed from the air, terrified, injured, suffering, and make this very personal, private painting that speaks of kind of universal pain and grief, that eruption of sorrow that cannot be constrained.
I think it embodied everything that people understood about that whole era and the tragedies that occurred, not just in the Spanish Civil War, but also in World War II.
By the time Picasso died on the 8th of April 1973, he was the most influential artist of the 20th century. His Weeping Woman is a hugely important part of his legacy. But what about the woman who inspired the painting? Picasso's relationship with Dora Maar lasted until the 1940s, when he dumped her for his next muse.
Dora had She had, I think, a nervous breakdown after the relationship with Picasso finally collapsed.
Picasso felt very guilty. She always said it wasn't because of him, but he felt guilty. He bought her a house, and she more or less lived on her own for the rest of her life.
Weeping Woman is actually the best painting of Dora Maar because it showed her true soul, and I can imagine her weeping like that almost daily towards the end of her relationship and thereafter over Picasso.
Of course, if you get too close to the sun, you get burned. And that was the tragedy, in a sense, of Dora. And, of course, the power of his presence in the art world and the art scene would mean that she would be overshadowed for a huge amount of time.
No longer. Maar is herself today celebrated as a very important artist, and her relationship with Picasso was about much more than its ending. Weeping Woman is testament to that.
Weeping Woman is a tremendously important image because it's a universal image that we can all relate to. It's a picture that talks about suffering. And unfortunately, at one time or other, we are all used to suffering.
I've known this painting for a long time, but I'd never realized before just how political it is. And I'm not just talking about the Spanish Civil War, I'm talking about relations between men and women. They say the personal is political, and that was certainly the case for Pablo Picasso. The Weeping Woman is as powerful today as she has ever been. There are plenty of paintings, perfectly well made, which somehow become limp and lifeless over time. And there are other paintings which radiate energy and become more alive and draw us in as time goes on. This picture crackles and fizzes with energy. It is impossible to be in the presence of the Weeping Woman and ignore her. And if you're looking for a definition of a great painting, that is about as clear as you can get. Next time, the final masterpiece of a truly iconic artist. People come into these rooms for that sense of serenity, and they walk out feeling calm and reassured about the world. This is the story of personal tragedy.
He became so depressed that he stopped painting.
Brutal violence.
He could hear the fighting, he could hear the bombs. So many young soldiers were killed.
And insatiable obsession behind Claude Monet's Waterlilies. These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Maar. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
He created a brand new way of depicting the world. The colours would fizz and pop on the surface.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? and what makes them the greatest paintings in the world. Paris isn't simply the capital of France, it is the artistic capital of the world. For centuries, this city has been a kind of buzzing hive of the West's cultural and artistic development, home to thriving communities of go-ahead artists and some of the world's most important artworks. Amidst the hustle of Paris, art is everywhere. Good art, not so good art. But there is one modestly sized gallery hiding something sensational. The Musée de l'Orangerie, built as a hothouse for oranges and lemons, holds one of the most extraordinary works that has ever been made. These rooms are the Sistine Chapel of Impressionism, and these are Claude Monet's Waterlilies. I've come here again and again, and I've been moved to tears almost every time. No artist had ever attempted to capture the rippling, heartbreaking evanescence of life like this, and no one has come close ever since. It's a 360-degree immersion into the glittering waterscape of a different and a better world. There are 8 of these huge curved panels, and standing in this room, you are surrounded by them. It is an almost hallucinatory feeling. You have different moods and colors of the sky, wind scudding across the water, different times of the day. And it's very hard to know how close to stand to these pictures as well, because to really see any of them, you have to go to the far side of the room and look back from a long distance. And yet, to properly understand them, you almost need your nose rubbing up against the canvas so that you can see the blistered, scrumbled, erupting and falling effect of Monet's extraordinary paintwork, the fruit of many, many decades of arduous study. These were the last works Monet produced, working relentlessly for 12 years. With them, he created a vision of life that still speaks clearly over a century after his oil paint first dried. More than 1 million people come into these rooms for that sense of serenity, and they walk out feeling calm and serene and reassured about the world, which is exactly not the story of the origin of the pictures. Behind these giant canvases, there lies a story of personal tragedy, of a brutal war, and a tormented man with a final, insatiable obsession. Claude Monet was born in Paris in 1840. His father wanted him to go into the family grocery business, but it wasn't for Monet.
He spent a lot of time out of doors, which is what fueled his passion for nature. And he was a brilliant caricaturist, and he was always, as a young age, drawing people.
Monet was a rebel right from the start, a man destined to change French painting forever. Using new, industrially made, easy-to-carry paints, he developed a fresh way of painting outside, trying to snatch fast-changing light and color. Like an athlete against the clock, he worked with a frantic urgency, desperate to catch a moment before it vanished forever.
He would go out to the riverbank, set up and begin capturing very quickly the scene that he saw in front of him, catching the interplay between light and shadow, capturing how the light changed and getting this very immediate image.
He was concerned with visual sensation, something that is almost an emotional response to a scene.
But this style of painting ran counter to the art establishment around him.
You see the type of painting that was in fashion, very grand, serious, that today we dismiss as bordering on the sentimental.
Painters were still doing mythological scenes or doing scenes from the Bible or from French national history, Joan of Arc, for example. And there was an appeal for painters to paint modern life. Monet really was the one who maybe took it to the next level.
In 1874, Monet and a like-minded group of hairy young radicals had their first exhibition to showcase this new artistic movement.
Monet's contribution was a beautiful painting entitled Impression: Sunrise.
It was a dawn scene of fishing boats in the harbor, and he did it very quickly, probably painted it in the course of a morning or even less than that.
It does just give a suggestion of what's happening. The shadow of the boats on the water, so different from everything that had gone before.
But unfortunately for Monet, who was struggling to provide for his young family, the reviews of the exhibition were utterly damning.
Most people thought they were sketches made in preparation for something that was going to come after.
There is shock, surprise, hostility.
The critics said, do not go and see this work. It's the work of madmen. It's bad for your health. There was a health warning.
One also said they are impressionists in that they do not reproduce a landscape, but convey the impression it makes.
That is what gives birth to the name Impressionism. It wasn't a name that they chose themselves. It was a name that a critic gave them.
And yet in these early works, with their immediacy, their freshness, you can see the stirrings of what was to come. His art might hover over the calm tranquility of nature, an art of gardens, rivers and meadows, but as Monet fought to make it, he was an increasingly tormented figure.
He would physically attack his canvas. He would take a penknife and slash it. He would stamp up and down on his canvases. He would put his foot through it. And he would also set fire to them. People would arrive and witness a kind of bonfire of the canvases as all of the work that he'd been doing for the past day or two went up in smoke.
To develop, Monet would need to get closer to the source of his inspiration, to look ever deeper, to stare ever harder. Although Monet's career was forged here, in the heart of Paris, his own heart was always somewhere else. And in 1883, in middle age, he decided to make a momentous move, which would change the paintings he made for the rest of his life. And it would mark the beginning of an obsession that would lead him to the creation of his monumental Waterlilies. Claude Monet's grand decorations are a unique masterpiece, a collection of 8 vast panels sweeping across 2 oval rooms. These canvases are the culmination of a nearly 4-decade-long obsession. Waterlilies, which in French are called nymphias or nymphs, have become as associated with Monet as, for instance, sunflowers with Van Gogh. And just as those sunflowers would be inspired by Van Gogh's move to the country, so it would be for Monet and his beloved lilies. In 1883, Monet arrived in the small village of Giverny and fell in love with a pink farmhouse, whose woodwork he painted a bright green. This would become a home for him and his growing family for the rest of his life. Plunging into its large, overgrown garden, he could shape nature to feed his art. At Giverny, it's hard to spot where the gardening ends and oil painting starts.
The only time he found he was happy was when he was surrounded by nature and colour.
He planted everything very consciously and created a kind of canvas, a living canvas that he could paint.
And alongside his studio and his work, this would become a busy family home. Monet lived here with his 2 children, Michel and Jean, and, after the death of his first wife, his new love, Alice Ochde, and her 6 children. His great-grandson, Philippe Piguet, remembers visiting the house as a young boy.
Nous venions souvent ici, tantôt pour venir chercher des œufs du poulailler, tantôt pour aller pêcher avec mon frère au bassin. Ou bien alors il y avait un autre jeu qui nous plaisait beaucoup, c'était de jouer dans le grand atelier des nymphéas. On s'amusait comme des fous, on était gamins.
The house and gardens that would become Monet's inspiration, his refuge, have remained today exactly as they were when he lived here.
Nous sommes ici dans la salle à manger de Claude Monet. C'est une salle à manger que je connais bien. Petit, j'ai mangé à cette table. C'est là où se tenaient les repas familiaux, famille assez nombreuse, puisque Monet s'est installé ici à Giverny avec ses 2 enfants et avec Alice Hochdé et ses 6 enfants.
It was the beginning of an extraordinarily productive decade. Monet's obsession with nature led to the creation of some of the most famous Impressionist paintings ever produced. From the coast of Normandy to the boulevards of Paris, from cathedrals to cornfields, Monet chose images which spoke to the French people. His painting broke boundaries all the time and was often revolutionary, but above all, he was intensely patriotic. And the world quite quickly caught up with his vision. The artist who'd once been so readily dismissed began to find himself highly in demand.
After the late 1880s, certainly through the 1890s, for the rest of his life, he was really #1. He was extremely popular with the critics, with the public. He was described as having the greatest eye in the history of art, this marvelous gift of the gods. And so it's not just that his prices are very high. He was the most famous painter in the world.
Monet's career flourished. So did his finances. By the 1890s, he had 8 gardeners, and in 1893, he embarked on the project that would come to define him for the rest of his life. His Waterlily pond.
He had water siphoned off from the river into his garden pond, and this Japanese bridge over it.
He planted irises and tulips, forget-me-nots, roses and wisteria, but it was the water lilies that would win his heart. Finally, he had the perfect subject for his obsession with light, movement and color.
Il se lève tôt le matin, très tôt. Il prend un bon petit déjeuner et il est au travail dès 8 heures du matin jusqu'à midi. À midi, c'est le déjeuner. On se retrouve en famille, on prend le café, et puis ensuite, à 14 heures, il retourne à l'atelier travailler. Et il revient vers 18 heures, mais il se couche très tôt. Parce que, comme on le dit, qu'est-ce que vous voulez que je fasse une fois que le soleil est couché?
In a letter, Monet wrote, "All at once I had the revelation how wonderful my pond was, and I reached for my palette, and I've hardly had any other subject since that moment." This was his passion project. Over the next 2 decades, he created around 250 canvases of the same pond, unaware that they'd become the inspiration for his great masterpiece to come. I've always been fascinated by this extraordinary and evolving body of work. Monet painted his Waterlily pond in every season, every time of the day, every kind of weather. He was obsessed by trying to paint what, strictly speaking, can't be painted. Movement. He was trying to capture the unstoppable shifts of light and colour on the surface of the water, what you might call the flicker of the real. Monet's brushwork changed with almost every piece, ranging from bold dashes and confident flourishes to gentle, fluid strokes. At times, he used a palette knife, building up layers to create the illusion of vegetation. 250 paintings of the same thing. Everyone is completely different. And you know, it's not just the time of day or the weather that makes them different. it's the mood as well. So there are kind of dreamy, languorous moments, saturated in light violets and purples. And then there are other paintings which are almost hallucinogenic, as if he was on some kind of drugs. The colours are so strange and so intense and so bright. You think, what was going on there? Nothing has ever looked like that. And there are others, again, where there's just a joyous, gentle, youthful, kind of exuberant, almost adolescent sense of colour. Bright blues, bright whites and reds, just something that makes you feel happy. For more than 20 years, Monet had lived a quiet but intensely productive life, hidden away from prying eyes, making paintings of his pond, his garden, and his family. But then in 1911, this quiet seclusion was brutally ended.
In 1910, Elise was diagnosed with leukemia, and she died in May of 1911. Monet understandably was devastated. Elise truly was the love of his life. And in his letters to his friends, he would say, "I am annihilated. The painter in me is dead, and all that remains is the inconsolable husband."
Cette photo est une photo qui représente Alice Monet. Elle est datée de 1910, un an avant la mort. C'est une photo que ses enfants lui ont donnée pour qu'il ait un souvenir de sa femme.
She'd looked after him, she'd been his housekeeper, she'd been his beloved wife. Real love affair. And he just gave up.
More bad news followed. When he finally turned back to painting, he had to accept he could barely see.
His vision had started to become extremely blurred. This, for an artist, was devastating.
And he really felt that this was now going to mark the end of his career.
Monet had developed a cataract in his right eye. The old painter's misfortunes were piling up, and in 1914 he was dealt the cruelest blow of all. His beloved son, Jean, who was just 46, died.
When his son passed away, he took it very badly. It broke him.
He was completely despondent and despairing, probably at his lowest.
He became so depressed that he stopped painting. He couldn't pick up a paintbrush.
And so at the age of 73, after having bestrode the art world for decades at this point, Monet was downing tools.
To him, paint and colour was life, and he was too depressed to go into the studio and paint. He wanted to stay in the sadness so that he could fully mourn for the family that he'd lost.
For more than 60 years, Monet had made art continuously. But now, as grief overwhelmed him, he found he simply couldn't paint. If this master was ever to work again, let alone begin a masterpiece that would consume the rest of his life, it was going to take the intervention of an unlikely friend and further tragedy on an epic scale. In 1914, the world's most famous artist, Claude Monet, essentially stopped painting. Overcome by grief and failed eyesight, his paintbrushes and studio were left untouched until the intervention of a close friend, the former French Prime Minister, Georges Clemenceau. They'd first met in 1860s Paris when Clemenceau was a young journalist and Monet a struggling artist.
The friendship between Monet and Clemenceau survived and thrived despite the fact, maybe because of the fact, that they were opposites in so many ways. If Clemenceau was the fearsome tiger, Monet was what Clemenceau called the hedgehog. And he always needed someone like Clemenceau or like his wife Elise, someone who could support him.
Clemenceau would come to see Monet and chat to him, to lift him up and try and convince him not to be so depressed and to start painting that would cheer him up. And then between them, they discussed this idea that Monet had already had, but between them, the idea became bigger and more grand.
And that project was to radically expand his obsession with the pond and the water lilies.
This is something that Monet had gone back and forth with throughout his life.
He's been painting the water lily ponds for years and years and years.
And Clemenceau said, these are really rather good. And that was all that Monet seemed to need at that point.
This would be more than a painting, it would be an experience in virtual reality.
Le plus important dans ce projet, c'est le concept d'avoir pensé une œuvre à 360 degrés, donc une œuvre dans laquelle le visiteur est invité à être totalement immergé.
It would evoke the experience of standing on the edge of his pond, Giverny.
This would be on a scale Monet had never attempted before. Each canvas would be 6 by 14 feet, and he planned to paint a whole family of them.
This was huge, this project. First of all, he had to paint the canvases in the garden because he didn't have a studio that was large enough. They were put on wheels so he could move them around and see what they looked like together.
He replaced his old dilapidated studio with a new one specially built to fit his huge canvases. This was the greatest artistic challenge Monet had ever taken on, and time was not on his side. The peace and calm of France was shattered as the Great War now engulfed Europe.
Giverny might seem a small, beautiful place, far removed from the Western Front, but in fact, war came to the village and really stayed there throughout the 4 years that Monet was working on his paintings.
Most of the villagers hurriedly abandoned their homes, not Claude Monet.
And Monet said, if the barbarians want to kill me, they'll have to do so in front of my life's work.
He could hear the fighting, he could hear the bombs and the shooting. Within the first few months, so many young soldiers were killed.
The war was personal to him. Giverny was only 50 kilometers away from the front line, and his stepson and his son were both fighting. He was also growing vegetables in his garden, which he would take to the soldiers in the local hospital to make sure that they had nutrition.
With the war in such close proximity, Monet's methods became dramatic, almost frantic. His grief and encroaching blindness produced a frenzy of creativity comparable to Shakespeare in his prime or the last years of Beethoven.
Painting was such an important part of his life that it was also something that could inspire great rages. As with many artists, with great art comes great temperament, and Monet was definitely no stranger to that.
Never before had this prolific artist painted with such urgency and from such a dark, desperate place.
It was all-consuming. He did not stop. That's what he was doing, dawn till dusk.
Monet was literally painting these beautiful works of art as France was experiencing the darkest chapters in its history. It was descending into the abyss. 1 million people were dying in France as he was working. And that obviously was on his mind the entire time he was working on them.
But he still felt the same way about his water lilies as he had when he first planted them. These landscapes of water and reflection have become an obsession for me, he'd written to a friend. It is beyond my strength as an old man, and yet I want to render what I feel.
The colours became wilder, more outrageous. The brush marks became less controlled.
His subject became smaller. It was all the pond. The only areas of sky and horizon are reflections.
Finally, at 11 o'clock on the 11th of November 1918, the pounding of the guns ceased. After 4 long years and millions dead, the war was over. And the following day, the 12th, Monet decided that once his grand Waterlilies were finished, he would donate them to the French people.
If you travel in France, you will find every small village has a monument to the First World War. It was a searing, traumatic national experience. Monet, too, felt this tragedy and wanted to make this gesture to contribute something that would perhaps help avert war again and at the same time commemorate the sacrifice of a whole generation.
To an old political ally, now France's ferocious wartime Prime Minister, Georges Clemenceau, he wrote, "It's not much, but it's the only way I have of taking part in the victory." When you think about it, these are a very strange proposition for a war memorial. Most countries get great granite columns or stone arches or heroic soldiers done in bronze. And France, what does France get from Monet? France gets some reflections and aquatic plants. But what Monet, in his wisdom, realized was that grief-stricken, harried, anxious people needed a contemplative, even a philosophical experience. These colossal canvases were meant to speak to the spirit of a nation ripped apart by the most brutal conflict the world had yet seen. But rather than hand them over at the moment they might be needed most, Monet couldn't quite let them go.
Monet never felt that he'd finished his paintings, these grandes décorations that he called them. He always felt he needed to do more. He needed to add a bit of paint here, a leaf there, a petal here.
Monet was a perfectionist, and I don't think he was ever happy with any of his paintings. I think he always felt they could be better. One of the wonderful quotes he has is when he wrote to Clemenceau and said, "When I am dead, I shall find their imperfections more bearable." While alive, he could never accept them, and he could never accept that this was everything that he could do.
8 years after the end of the war, on the 5th of December 1926, Monet died, aged 86. For his last moments, Clemenceau, the radical, patriotic politician who'd become his closest friend, was at his side. And on the day he was buried, a mist descended over Giverny.
As one journalist said, Normandy became a Monet painting, almost as if the elements themselves were paying tribute to the artist who had captured them so beautifully for the rest of the world to see.
Shortly afterwards, his vast panels were transported from Giverny to the Musée de l'Orangerie in Paris, where they were installed exactly as Monet had prescribed. There was nothing like them anywhere. The shape of the two oval rooms meant those who visited would have no sense of where the cycle of canvases began or ended.
He'd very carefully decided which ones he wanted alongside each other, adjacent, juxtaposed and all in the gallery. They are exactly as he would have arranged them.
We get to see, when we go into those two rooms, an art exhibition curated by Monet himself. These were the paintings that he hand-picked.
He wanted people to be surrounded by them, which meant they had to be displayed in a panorama.
What we would describe today as an installation that would be immersive.
What Monet had imagined was a way for the viewer to escape into his world. Monet made these pictures so big for a purpose. They surround you, they envelop you. And because they're so big, you can't simply concentrate on one part of one picture for very long. Your eye is caught endlessly by the next thing. And as you let yourself be surrounded and enveloped by these pictures, you get a sense of timelessness, of endlessness. But as you get lost in the cycle of life, it's almost as if a pattern begins to emerge. After a while, you realize that what's happening as one bit of one picture fades into another bit of another picture, as one color bleeds into another color, every color is changing and morphing and rippling around you, and you realize after a while that these are perhaps the world's only really successful paintings of time moving.
The physical dimensions are really significant. The way in which you walk into an entire architectural space and feel as if you are standing there on the edge of the pond, looking across this surface.
Monet's great installation would finally open to the public in May 1927, but the big question remained, would the world be ready for these paintings? Claude Monet's grand decorations, the culmination of a lifetime's work and his gesture to the French people after the First World War, were finally ready to be unveiled to the world after his death. This was a project that may have taken the artist 12 years, but was the world ready? When Monet's extraordinary waterscapes finally went on display to the public in May 1927, just a few months after the artist's death, they completely tanked.
The reviews were terrible. They said that he had left behind nature, which he had painted so convincingly for much of his career, and begun painting internal impressions instead.
They were really criticised. Oh, scathing criticism. The critics said that he hadn't moved on from Impressionism.
They really saw this as the work of someone who had lost his way artistically and maybe even lost his way emotionally or mentally. Monet's godson wrote that Monet died twice, once in Giverny in 1926 and then a second time with the opening of the Orangerie.
Just as the world hadn't been ready for Monet's first exhibition 50 years earlier, so the same thing happened now. People did not come. Clemenceau was devastated. In June 1928, he observed there wasn't a soul there. As Monet's vast canvases began to gather dust, their tailor-made gallery was taken over for other needs.
The space that was built for them was covered with false walls to show other artworks by other artists and other exhibitions.
There were medieval tapestries shown in front of them. When the ceiling leaked and water dripped on the paintings, nobody really cared.
And they used the room almost like a centre for other activities, dog shows even.
That was humiliating enough. But in August 1944, towards the end of the Second World War, the Orangerie was bombed and Monet's canvases were damaged. It was a catalogue of relentless indignities. With shrapnel from Allied shells buried in the canvases, Monet's grand decorations, the work on which he had driven himself to exhaustion for the last 12 years of his life, were now effectively forgotten. As a final insult to Monet's work, in 1966, the Orangerie acquired a new collection of art. And one of the new gallery spaces was built directly over the room of the Waterlilies, cutting off these paintings so brimming with life from all daylight with a solid concrete ceiling. And that's how they remained for 3 decades. So, how were these extraordinary paintings rediscovered to the point where they became the most famous water lily images in the world?
Just off Fifth Avenue stands the spanking new home of a nationally important institution, the New York Museum of Modern Art.
The next chapter of this story begins in New York, in the then achingly cool Museum of Modern Art. Inside was one of Monet's water lily paintings, a forerunner to his grand decorations.
While the reaction was negative in Europe, over in New York, people were flocking to see that.
And it was becoming a magnet for a new wave of American artists, the abstract expressionists. They painted big, and they wanted to see the vast canvases that the smaller water lily paintings had inspired.
Every young American painter coming to Paris flocked to the Orangerie to pay homage to the great Claude Monet and to see these paintings that they had been hearing about for themselves, and they were astounded by them.
They absolutely loved them, went back to America and started to paint inspired by them.
Rothko, Jackson Pollock, de Kooning, artists that could work big, and artists that could use their whole arm to paint with.
Monet, the master of European Impressionism, was now becoming a figurehead for American abstract art.
Monet n'est pas un peintre abstrait, mais il ouvre les portes d'une possibilité de l'abstraction. Et ça, c'est une qualité qui le met au sommet d'une histoire de l'art du XXe siècle.
But although Monet's paintings were resonating with a new generation of artists, the orangery itself remained something of an embarrassment. Optimistic visitors couldn't believe the way Monet's grand decorations were being displayed. In 1996, it was finally decreed that the gallery would undergo a $36 million renovation to become a more fitting host to its rediscovered treasure. The responsibility was handed to the architect Olivier Brochet.
Quand nous sommes arrivés la première fois à l'orangerie, on avait l'impression de descendre à la cave pour aller voir les nymphéas.
Brochet came up with a radical strategy to light Monet's masterpieces in a way the artist had always dreamed of. He decided to remove the concrete ceiling above the Waterlilies and replace it with a skylight, all without damaging the murals themselves.
C'est un défi technique immense. Les murs que vous voyez, on ne peut pas la déplacer. Et on ne peut pas décrocher ces peintures du mur. Et donc ici, on est en train de construire l'abat-jour pour ramener la lumière. Et les nymphéas, dans les conditions, sont toujours là-dedans, comme celle-là.
Now sitting deep in the heart of a construction site, Monet's canvases had to be protected by specially made cases.
Sur toute l'œuvre, il y avait des palpeurs, tous les 20 cm. Et dès qu'on faisait trop de vibrations au-dessus, il y avait une alerte et le conservateur venait du Louvre et arrêtait le chantier. Très souvent, nous étions obligés d'arrêter le chantier et ça a beaucoup ralenti le chantier.
It took 6 years and almost $40 million, but in 2006, the doors finally reopened. And this time, the public was ready.
You couldn't get more different from the time they were first displayed in 1927. People celebrated, media news went round the world, everyone was queuing to see them.
The paintings were utterly transformed. That space was transformed, and you could finally see the paintings as Monet wanted us to be able to see them, in a kind of natural light, in a beautiful kind of luminescence, which was the sort of light that he strove to paint throughout the course of his entire lifetime.
Notre grande fierté, c'est d'avoir d'une part restitué la primauté, la pleine présence de l'œuvre de Monet, comme il l'avait voulu, comme il l'avait installé. Elle a retrouvé son esprit d'origine.
Cette incroyable immensité picturale dans laquelle il nous invite finalement à nous plonger et dans laquelle, par le biais de ce bassin, il a capté quelque chose de la beauté du monde. Et c'est là où Monet est un pionnier total.
From being forgotten, they now have a unique importance in the life of this city.
The grand decorations are so special because they were a tribute to the French people. They were a tribute to the war. It wasn't just water and trees. The trees were almost bowing in respect to the Parisians.
It's a temple to art and a temple for modern France.
This whole gallery is devoted to these paintings, and it's what Monet wanted. He wanted it to be a place of meditation, a place of peace, and you see that. You see visitors sitting there peacefully, taking it all on. They're very calming, they're very uplifting. It's an experience, a complete experience.
It's now been nearly 100 years since these epic murals were first hung on the Orangery's walls. What an extraordinary journey these canvases have been on, from their traumatic conception to being buried alive and then refound by a new generation. It truly is quite a tale. These aren't really pictures about plants or even reflections. These are pictures of the beauty and transience and therefore the poignancy of human life, indeed all life. None of us are here for very long, but it is gorgeous while it lasts. And that is Monet's message to the French and, thank God, to the rest of us as well. But I don't want to end this as a film about art history. If you possibly can, come and see these pictures for yourself. But please, don't bring a camera. Bring your eyes and your heart, because that is all you need. Next time, the quintessentially English landscape. You want to be there and feel the wind in your face as the clouds scud over your head, which sparked an artistic revolution a long way from home.
French artists cannot believe the originality and the freshness of Constable's approach.
I go behind the canvas of John Constable's Haywain. These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Maar. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
He created a brand new way of depicting the world. The colours would fizz and pop on the surface.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? Ever since London's National Gallery opened its doors nearly 2 centuries ago, people have flocked through them for a glimpse of its exceptional collection. In the early days, there were only 38 pictures to look at here, as against well over 2,000 now. Every single important Western art movement is represented here, running from the early Middle Ages right the way through to the early 20th century. Here you will find extraordinary achievements which have changed the course of art history in room after room after room. Behind every piece here, there is a story. But there is one painting, and you will know it, whose impact on the story of Western art is perhaps particularly surprising. I'm talking about John Constable's The Haywain. This This is, in essence, a very, very simple image of the little pinch of England that Constable knew best. It's the Suffolk-Essex border, the River Stour, and in the middle, there is a Haywain, a cart which has just delivered its load of hay over here to Flatford Mill, the Constable family business. That's Willie Lott's cottage on the left, a building Constable knew very well and drew and sketched obsessively all his life. In the far distance, you can not only see the harvesters scything and working away, little blobs in the distance, working very hard. You can, if you look really carefully, see a second Haywain, in this case, absolutely laden with hay, and the little boy sitting on top of it. It's almost completely disguised by the trees, but it's there. For such a gentle scene, it's extraordinary how it's imprinted itself on the national psyche. Everything is lapping and moving in a kind of gorgeous, midsummer, golden haze. I think the overarching feeling of this painting is calm and peace. There is a natural order, and all is well with this world. This is most people's ideal of what the serene English countryside should look like. But behind the canvas, there is an unexpected story. It is a story of rebellion, above all, a story of painting and working against the odds, of believing in yourself when nobody else will, and believing also that even in the most remote corners of the countryside, you can do new things so radical and extraordinary, they will spark revolutions a very long way from home. If you want to understand the world of this masterpiece and the man who created it, you have to begin in his beloved Suffolk, the landscape that fed his imagination for his entire life. John Constable was born in this village on the 11th of June, 1776.
He is one of 6 children who are the product of a very happy and steady marriage between his parents Anne and Golding Constable.
Golding Constable is often described as a miller, but that's actually doesn't quite give the right impression of his status. He was more of a rural entrepreneur.
Wanting for nothing, Constable described his comfortable early life as a careless childhood. For Simon Peachy from the National Trust, there are clues across East Berkholt which reveal the kind of upbringing the young Constable enjoyed.
Constable family home was just on the other side of these railings, but the railings are the only part of the house that exists today. In his time, it was a big mansion, one of the biggest houses in East Berkholt. He painted some famous pictures of the kitchen garden and the flower garden. And you can imagine it's standing here, what the house and the grounds would have looked like.
Constable had a very privileged life. His father was rich. He came from this wonderfully comfortable background, and he loved the countryside. He was always out just sketching the countryside.
He was absolutely adamant that he wanted to be a painter, although nobody in his family, or even remotely connected with his family, had ever been an artist.
Constable was inspired by Suffolk's vast, overarching skies, thickly wooded glades and busy rivers, but he didn't know how to channel his passion until a chance encounter.
When he was 19, he met a travelling connoisseur, George Beaumont, who was an amateur painter and always travelled with one of his paintings by the 17th century French painter Claude, and he showed it to Constable, and that was the first masterpiece he would have seen.
This was the first time he saw a painting that began to match how he felt about landscape, that gave him the same kind of thrill he felt sketching. The path to the Haywain, however, would not be easy. The first blot on the landscape was in the shape of his formidable father.
Golding, having made a substantial fortune and set up a very sound business, wanted John to take over the business. And there was a big tussle with his father about that.
With great unhappiness, he knuckled under. The only advantage was that running mills meant he became a skilled observer of the weather, a professional eye essential for his art. His determination to be a painter didn't wane, and after 5 long years, he finally got his way.
It wasn't until quite late on, 1799, when he was well into his 20s, that he got permission to go to London and start training as an artist.
Now 23, he headed for the chaotic hubbub of the capital to study at the Royal Academy. He was given a basic income of £100 to pay for board and lodgings by his reluctant father. That's only £8,000 in today's money. This meagre allowance meant that Constable was doubly desperate for success as an artist. And to achieve that, he first needed to get his landscapes into the great summer exhibition.
If you want to be an artist, you have to make it at the Academy. This is a very real competition for money, for patronage, and above all, for reputation. And if you are exhibited in the Academy in what's known as the Great Room, where you will be seen by the great and the good, you know you've made it.
But the great and the good barely got a chance to see Constable's paintings because even the few that were accepted were seen as drearily unfashionable.
Constable has set himself a very difficult furrow to plough. At the time, history painting is considered to be the most prestigious. Instead, he's chosen to specialise in landscape, which is seen to be a much more inferior genre. And within landscape itself, he is also not choosing to do grand historical landscapes. Instead, he's chosen a type of scenery which actually would be considered by most people to be very bland, very workaday, boring, unexceptional sorts of places.
Considering he was quite a mild-mannered man, one would think that he might have thought, well, I'll have a go at what everybody else likes. But no, he insisted he wanted to paint in this way. He was fascinated by painting nature as he saw it.
But it wasn't just the subjects that failed to arrest visitors' attention. His relatively small canvases were lost against the vast classical landscapes by other exhibitors, like the hugely successful J.M.W. Turner.
I think effectively nobody much noticed them. They were hung not just side by side on the wall, up 3, 4, 5 high, and in order to pick up attention, somehow it had to have some sort of real star quality, and Constable couldn't manage to muster that.
Constable was surrounded by the painting superstars of the age, doing those huge historical canvases and glossy, fashionable portraits, exactly what the Royal Academy and its patrons really wanted. And at the same time, Constable was painting exactly what he really wanted, which was stunningly, amazingly unpopular. Unsuccessful, unappreciated and poor, the future wasn't looking bright for John Constable. But perseverance is all. He wasn't so far away from a masterpiece that would propel him to international fame. He realised that to get noticed, bigger would be better. Next up would be his famous 6-footers. It's hard to think of a painting more English than the Haywain, a scene indelibly linked to the national psyche. And yet, for most of his life, its creator, John Constable, was far from a success. For an artist now seen as so very conservative, he was remarkably experimental, which didn't help sales. Now, it's not that he didn't want to earn money. Early on, he took church commissions, and all his life he painted portraits to keep the cash rolling in. But what really turned Constable on was the magic of the English countryside in all its seasons. The softness, the fertile freshness, and above all, those subtle, glowing colours. He was happiest when painting his placid scenes, but doing so in a radically new way. He valued what he saw in the raw, with his own eyes, nature unfiltered. He could only do this by working outdoors, which was both unconventional and irritatingly difficult.
He believed you couldn't paint nature unless you looked at it. So he wasn't painting every leaf, but he was painting what to us looks extremely realistic, extremely naturalistic. And this was so radical for the time.
At that point, most people painted in studios. And Constable was seen sometimes as a little bit mad for wanting to paint outdoors. It was a difficult process. Now you can buy little portable paint pots and little tubes of paint. Then he had to take his paints, most of which he would have made himself, in a kind of pig's bladder or some kind of animal skin pouch that would not let the paint go dry. It was a really big performance, and that's why most people didn't do it. Constable was seen as very unusual.
Despite the innovation and the obsessive effort, all of which would eventually feed into his Haywain, these paintings failed to find buyers. So when the struggling artist fell in love and married Mariah, a childhood friend from a well-to-do family, the daughter of King George IV's solicitor, life suddenly became a lot more complicated.
The romance of John Constable and Mariah Bicknell is a Jane Austen story with lots of complications, opposition from the family, dramas, unexpected meetings, all that sort of thing.
Neither family thought they should marry. Her family didn't like him because they thought he'd never be rich enough as an artist to support her.
Constable still had a small share of the family business, but this didn't bring in much. So, to try to provide for his new wife and young family, he now needed to make his painting finally pay its way.
It was not an easy journey for Constable. He struggled financially and emotionally all through his artistic career.
And yet there was this drive in him to produce these naturalistic paintings, to carry on painting the skies in such detail and to paint the water. Even though he felt that he was a failure, he carried on, hoping that other people would see what he could see.
The single-minded Constable would not compromise on the unpopular style or narrow subject of his paintings.
He was extremely strong-minded, absolutely determined about what he wanted to do. And actually, one of the things about Constable is that he gets most of his major pictures for years and years from a few hundred yards of the river, which he knew intimately well.
Then, in 1819, he widened his gaze and inspiration struck. Since his smaller canvases were lost on walls full of epic paintings, why not think a lot bigger?
One of the things he does is to come up with a completely new kind of exhibition landscape, which he calls the 6-footer, where he explodes his River Stour scenes that he's so keen to reveal the everyday poetry and beauty of, up to a monumental scale that would be more readily associated with epic history painting.
The first of these 6-footers is called The White Horse, which he unveiled to the Royal Academy later that year.
Crucially, it sold. And finally, he felt that he was starting to get somewhere. These large-scale paintings really started to give him hope that he was going to make it as a landscape artist.
For the first time, people really begin to sit up and take notice of him. I think the pictures are simply too big not to be noticed.
Unsurprisingly, Constable planned to go big again with his next canvas, one he'd been thinking about and prepping for years, and the painting that would finally establish his place in history.
The Haywain evokes a Suffolk scene that Constable grew up with, and we know he knew very well indeed. But it was painted here in London, more than 70 miles southwest of the original subject. So, obvious question, how did Constable get that juicy freshness from so very, very far away? Leafing through earlier images of Constable's work, it becomes increasingly obvious that the Haywain is not one single moment in time, but the culmination of years and years of looking and painting and drawing. So, for example, here from 11 years before the Haywain is another painting of Flatford Lock, lovely, fresh, lush and beautiful, and of the buildings around Flatford Lock, again 10 years beforehand, he's already noting down the details of the buildings. And the Haywain itself, well, there are lots of drawings of horses and carts and wains, I suppose you'd call them. Here's a rather crude one where he's clearly working very fast from life. You can see that by the nervousness of the pencil lines, if you like. Lots and lots of redrawing around the figure and so forth. That could only be from life, but very beautiful. And here, for instance, is a more completed drawing, again of a cart and two horses in this case, and he's fascinated by the way the shadows fall around the wheel, the rim of the wheel, the spokes, everything is in great detail. This is a man who is always watching, always noting, and crucially, always remembering.
It would take him 2 years to complete after Constable started preparing the Haywain at his London studio in 1819. Maria, however, was struggling with her health, and so a change of scenery and cleaner air were essential in the summer months.
London, which was a city of 1 million people with medieval sanitation and primitive infrastructure, heated entirely by coal, was so polluted that you could see a sort of dome-shaped grey cloud hanging over it from 15, 20 miles away.
Constable moved his family north to just beside Hampstead Heath to avoid the smog. It may seem surprising to find the home of a man so associated with rural life here, but this part of London, the country in the town, would matter in his struggle to create the Haywain. The current owner of his last address in Hampstead is Christine Pullen.
Constable loved the house, but he complained to his friend John Fisher that living here was ruining him because he was paying 4 guineas a week for the house furnished at a time when an artisan family could be housed and fed on £1 a week. So that was an enormous sum, and he had a growing family, and he was not selling many pictures at that time.
But there was one definite advantage in paying those bills.
This is the backyard of the house, where Constable found a shed containing mops and brooms and buckets and coals, and he cleared the shed out in order to create a small workroom where he could work on his sketches. Here, he was in the middle of the countryside, effectively, then, and he liked the open views of the skies and made a lot of sketches while he was living at 2 Lower Terrace. He called it skying.
On the heath, he would spend days with his eyes glued to the skies and clouds, a delighted weatherman. Only 4 years before Constable began making his annual excursions to Hampstead, the first ever book of cloud classifications had been published. This was a text he's thought to have read, as he believed that we see nothing until we truly understand it, and the details of the skies he sketched here would eventually find their way into the Suffolk of the Haywain.
Constable was fascinated by the passing clouds and the changing of the light. It's very similar to the skies in East Anglia, and I think that's one of the aspects of Hampstead that attracted him to the area.
While Constable was lost in his obsession perfecting the skies for the Haywain, for perhaps the first time, there was a good reason for him not to be in Suffolk. The Industrial Revolution was sweeping across Britain. Infrastructure and agriculture were changing fast. The rivers and the mills were now part of a capitalist economy, ripping up the old ways and plunging many rural workers into uncertainty and hunger.
The agricultural labourers were leaving their work to go and work in the cities, and then those who were staying to work were finding that agriculture started to become much more mechanised. It was a time of huge inequality, a lot of poverty, and a lot of people who were really eking out a subsistence either from the land or from a very poorly paid job.
Less than 4 years before Constable began his Haywain, a sharp hike in the cost of bread led to riots across East Anglia.
The poor labourers couldn't afford bread. They weren't earning enough to even pay for bread. The only thing they could do to try and draw attention to themselves and to their families that were starving was to riot and protest.
Torched by despairing workers, much of Constable's home patch was now surrounded by the glare of fires. And as he began work on the Haywain, how much of this rebellion would be reflected in it? Absolutely none. This is the art of a Tory idealist, not a social realist. And this, I think, is what's particularly striking about Constable's painting. It is political art. Not directly, he's certainly not shouting or stabbing a finger at us, but he is saying that this vision of natural harmony and social peace, not what you're reading in the newspapers about turmoil and strikes and protests, but this is how it ought to be. In terms of his technique, the way he put paint on the canvas, Constable was an avant-garde, progressive painter. But in terms of his message, what he was trying to say, he was profoundly conservative. By 1821, preparations for the final canvas were coming together.
Now, what I find really exciting is the way that you can follow the progression of the work by sketches and images as it develops. So right at the beginning, you have a very, very loose, very impressionistic picture. This could have been done by Monet or any of the Impressionists in the 1870s, it seems to me. It's very, very loose, very fresh, and I love it. Lots of people love the sketches particularly. And then later on, there's a more worked-up version, which is very clearly the same painting, exactly the same design. The colours are slightly more muted and the paintwork is looser, but he's clearly got in focus exactly what he's going to paint. And then you get the final version. Suddenly the colours bounce out and it's fresh and complete, the final and perfect six-footer. It was the hauling together of all of these images, the triumphant compilation of a body of work Constable had been at since childhood, which makes this six-footer such an extraordinary moment. The Haywain isn't just a picture, it is the combination of 40 years of looking and working. It is everything that Constable knew on a single page.
He was ready to give the world his masterpiece, but was the world ready to receive it? The Haywain, the most famous work by the 19th century artist John Constable, is widely regarded as the quintessential English landscape painting. Completed in 1821, the scene looks calm, serene, and effortless, though the process of creating it was anything but.
Constable was one of the great painters of British weather. Now, lots and lots of people, of course, had painted skies and clouds and wood throughout art history, but in almost all cases, they weren't really painted or drawn by people who had sat outside in the real weather, the English weather, as Constable had for months and months and months and got flies all over him and got soaked by the rain. He'd studied the clouds obsessively for years, month in, month out, and these are real clouds. They're moving at speed. You can tell they're moving fast. The wind is up. And there's a real sense of wateriness about this picture, not just the river splashing away and moving quite fast, the little boy fishing in it there and some ducks rising from the river, but also the sense of the cycle of water.
Constable once wrote about the sound of water escaping from mill dams, willows, old rotten planks, slimy posts and brickwork. I love such things. As long as I do paint, I shall never cease to paint such places. These have always been my delight.
You can tell it's rained relatively recently, that the mud is still wet, but there is more rain to come. You can see there's a heavy cloud there. There's going to be another shower. Not a drenching downpour, but just enough to produce that delicate freshness, the juiciness in the English landscape that Constable always thought should be there.
He submitted it to the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition of 1821. His last painting there, The White Horse, had been warmly received, and he hoped this would be even more so. As his fellow artists crowded into the Academy's rooms, he must have wondered if this would be the painting that proved he had been right all along.
When the Haywain was hung in the Royal Academy, people didn't like it. They didn't want it.
People were shocked. They were quite horrified that he would be so bold as to paint just a landscape that size. He was just sneered at.
This is a farm wagon he's painting. There aren't any mountains, there aren't any waterfalls, there aren't any wild rocks. It's just a pool in a rather ordinary little river in East Anglia.
One of the things they find problematic is what they call Constable's snow or piebald scumbling, the little dashes and brushstrokes of white pigment, which he liberally adds as the final layer of finish to a picture to capture what he describes as the elusive quality of sparkle in nature. But during the 19th century, people could not read those dabs of paint as anything other than dabs of paint. They couldn't see them for the visual metaphor they were meant to be, only as a very sort of troubling interruption on the surface of the picture. But I think his biggest problem is simply a lack of interest in what he's doing.
This was nearly a dreary disaster for Constable, except that there was one crucial visitor who could see its genius clearly.
One of the people to see the Haywain when it's exhibited at the Royal Academy in London is a French visitor to the capital, Théodore Géricault, who is being feted all over town for his incredible masterpiece, The Raft of the Medusa, an icon of French Romantic painting.
It's been said that Géricault's opinion of the Haywain changed the history of art forever.
He describes himself as quite stunned by it.
And rather than dismiss it as a strange work of art, as most of the British viewers had, he was amazed by it. He was spellbound. He saw something in it that the British hadn't seen.
So now an art dealer in Paris picked up on Géricault's excitement, and he suggested Constable send his painting to France to be exhibited at the Paris Salon of 1824. This was an unexpected thing to happen, but it was a real coup for John Constable.
The Parisian Salon at the Louvre is the art event of the Western world. If you were to use a sporting metaphor, then you could describe the Royal Academy as being like the Athletics World Championship, but the Salon is like the Olympics. It's the gold standard, and if you've made it there, you really have made it.
The Haywain was now going to be seen by the most important and influential French artists. But would a painting, the very epitome of Englishness, find favour with the French when it had failed so dismally at home?
When Constable's The Haywain was exhibited in the Paris Salon, that's when people's eyes opened and they wept in front of it because they realised what an astonishing painting it really was.
The French adored Constable instantly, a coup de foudre. Later, a curator at the Louvre would go on to call him the Messiah of landscape painting.
French artists cannot believe the originality and the freshness of Constable's approach. They're also drawn to the fact that Constable is painting his own native landscape. This is not a site drawn from classical antiquity. It is clearly somewhere very specific in England. One of the artists who sees it is Eugène Delacroix, who immediately goes to his own painting, The Massacre at Schios, a painting about a terrible slaughter of Greek inhabitants during the Greek War of Independence, and immediately starts to repaint areas of it based upon the handling that he sees in Constable's picture.
Constable's use of colour delighted Delacroix. He wrote, "What he says here about the green of his meadows can be applied to every tone." And the change of fortunes didn't end there for Constable and this revolutionary painting.
The work of this previously obscure British artist started to have a huge impact on French art as a whole.
From Delacroix, we go very quickly on to artists in his circle who begin to paint landscapes of the French countryside a la Constable, with sort of Haywain-esque tumble-down cottages beside a pond.
Constable's impact was seismic. His devotion to capturing a moment in nature through immersing himself in the outdoors inspired Paris. Here, in Constable's skies and sweet rural fields, was the groundwork for Impressionism. Meanwhile, radicals like Rousseau, Millet and Manet would soon be seeking out Constable's canvases for themselves. Constable's Haywain didn't just overturn the French art scene, it also transformed his own fortunes. Constable now sold more paintings in France than he'd managed during his entire career in Britain. That meant enough French francs rolling in to save Constable's bacon. But there is something quite extraordinary about this, is there not? There is John Constable, the ultimate patriotic, conservative image maker of rural England, and it's Paris that saves him. Thank God for the French. Great art is always rooted somewhere, but it is never limited by flags and national borders. But fame and fortune across the Channel was of little interest to Constable. He said, "I would rather be a poor man in England than a rich man abroad." And so when he was invited to France to be awarded a royal honour by the king himself, his response shouldn't have been a surprise.
He was given a gold medal, which would have been presented by Charles X, but Constable fatally refused to travel to Paris to receive it in person. In fact, never left Britain. The furthest he ever went was the Lake District, and that was on the sort of outside edge of what Constable regarded as possible.
Despite this profound distaste for travel, Constable's prospects were definitely improving. But just 4 years after being celebrated as England's most innovative painter at the Paris Salon, disaster struck. His beloved wife, Maria, fell gravely ill.
She probably had tuberculosis and had always been delicate, but also her fate, as was the fate of an awful lot of middle-class Regency wives, was almost incessant pregnancy. She had 7 children and 2 miscarriages in about a decade, and that obviously had a seriously bad effect on her health.
Maria died shortly after the birth of her 7th child, and Constable was totally devastated. The face of the world had changed for him, he wrote in a letter to his brother. He wore mourning for the rest of his life, and he never really got over her demise.
Constable was overwhelmed by melancholy. His first major and much dreamed of triumph as an artist was now overshadowed by domestic disaster. How would he possibly survive these blows? John Constable had struggled to follow his dream of becoming an artist, and then finally with the Haywain, his fortunes seemed to have changed. After more than 2 decades of finding his art almost entirely unappreciated or rejected, by the 1820s, John Constable was enjoying a period of unanticipated artistic success. But this success didn't translate into hard cash, and it was followed by tragedy. The death of his much-loved wife, Maria, had left him a single father with 7 children dependent on him.
One of the unusual things about Constable, he's one of the very few major artists who was a decent human being. He really was a good, affectionate, faithful husband and a very good and loving and dutiful father who did his best to bring up a large family of young children after Maria died on his own for the next decade.
He may never have had the huge financial success in England he deserved, but he did finally receive the recognition he'd so craved from the Royal Academy.
Constable is finally made a Royal Academician in 1829, over a quarter of a century after his rival Turner, for example. It's a very bittersweet occasion for him. Finally, he's got this professional endorsement he's worked so hard all his life to achieve, but it comes too late in order to be able to share it with his love.
And another, I think, greater accolade was to follow. When he was 56, the widowed Constable was on board a horse and carriage heading back to London from Suffolk.
He saw the countryside that he loved, and he just mentioned to his fellow passengers, "Oh, isn't it beautiful?" And a gentleman sitting near him on the carriage said, "But of course, it's Constable country." And you just have to imagine the poor man had been so melancholy, so depressed. It must have given him such a boost. He was delighted to know that he'd actually made a mark on people's psyches and people's attitudes towards what he loved as well.
John Constable died in 1837, and for such a devoted family man, it's fitting that he left most of his work to his daughter. She, in turn, bequeathed the paintings and sketches to the nation. They went on display in 1888 at the National Gallery, And that is when something quite extraordinary happened.
For the first time, people see his en plein air sketches. These very fresh, simple, beautiful studies made out of doors. And because of later movements like Impressionism, they now can judge these things and realise the value and the originality and innovations that Constable had brought to them. And Constable, in some ways, gets reinvented with definitely a sense of patriotic pride that actually here was Constable, the British artist, doing it a good 50 years before the French.
People flocked to see them because it was a sense of nostalgia. And also it was a bit of peace from the noise and the hubbub of city life. You know, they could lose themselves in the landscape, in nature.
And the biggest draw, obviously, was the Haywain.
It became instantly popular. It suddenly seemed to be a symbol of Britain in the British countryside. And in fact, it was so popular that by the 1890s, Thomas Cook had started to organise tourist visits to Constable country so that people could see where the Haywain was set.
You've got to remember that sort of in the 19th century, there were new trains taking people on trips around England. People wanted to go to Constable country.
It's still called Constable country today. And what's quite fascinating is that Constable really created a world that tourism then kept pristine.
The National Trust's Simon Peachy works as part of the team maintaining and preserving this iconic scene.
So if you walk this way, this is the Haywain view. Standing here, it's like stepping inside Constable's paintings. So on the left-hand side, you've got Willie Lott's house, and you can see if the building is pretty similar today to how it was in Constable's time. You've got the mill pond right in front of you. And again, in Constable's painting, you've got the hay cart sitting in the middle of the mill pond. You've even got some oak trees. They're probably not the same oak trees that were there in Constable's time. But if you look through to the distance, that mass of trees, that's in exactly the same place as it was in Constable's time. So literally, standing here, you're stepping into his painting. You're almost walking in his footsteps.
Every year, 250,000 people come to admire the prospect that inspired Constable's Haywain all those years ago.
We like to say to visitors that we've got the original of the Haywain and the National Gallery has got the copy that was done by John Constable.
The landscape Constable painted is now an important part of the history of British art. But it's more than that. It's ingrained in our lives. It's so very familiar, an image found on countless calendars, biscuit tins, cushions and jigsaws in households all around the country. John Constable has taken a sentimental rural vision and raised it to an ecstatic level. Yes, this bears no relationship to what was actually happening in Suffolk at the time. And yes, the more you think about it, it is an almost ridiculously banal image. It is the 1820s equivalent of a battered white van leaving a Tesco forecourt on its way to make a food delivery. This is John Constable gives you logistics solutions. And yet, when you look at it, it is impossible not to feel humbled and proud and very moved indeed. It is a golden age painting, full of the enjoyment of nature, fresh, delicious. You want to be there. You want to stand in that field and smell the wildflowers and feel the wind in your face as the clouds scud over your head. It is a deeply, deeply nostalgic painting, and nostalgia is a very powerful emotion. John Constable took the ordinary, the English ordinary, and he made it epic. He made it majestic. And by doing that, he touched the soul of the English forever. And that is why this is one of the world's great paintings. Next time, an image that stirred passion and anger for nearly 400 years.
When it was made, this kind of image was outlawed, forbidden, and certainly never to be seen in public.
A groundbreaking work of rare beauty.
He's really fascinated by the whiteness or the paleness of her flesh. So it's quite a sexy picture.
That defied the Spanish Inquisition and roused the suffragettes into violent action.
What she had concealed about her person was some form of meat cleaver.
The remarkable story of the Rokeby Venus.